signal. It's July 18th, 2024. I'm with Mr. John Jeckovich and his beautiful great-grandson, Jake Jeckovich, and barely a year old. Mr. Jeckovich is knocking on the door of 100, and they're both looking good. Hi, Jake, and hello, Mr. Jeckovich. Now I'm going to read, that's the future warrior there, Jake Jeckovich. Now I'm going to read about, I titled that one, Battle of Bulge, Jake Jeckovich. Okay?
Okay.
Sure. Now I'm going to start reading Mr. John Jeckovich's book. It's about the Battle of Bulge. And we're on chapter 10 on page 279. And that chapter is titled Church Service in the Bulge. Well, after all the months and almost a year of training, they're still in combat. They just entered combat about a month or so ago. Some of the temperatures are 20 below, the coldest winter in Germany in over 20 or 30 years. And some of Mr. John Jeckovich's friends and fellow soldiers were already killed. What's your dog tag number, Mr. Jeckovich?
2420965.
Okay. I'm going to start reading, but I'm also going to read a little bit of background on the World War II, which was Hitler's last chance. That was the end of it. Hitler's last chance was to win at the Battle of Bulge with 600,000 troops, German troops, 1,000 tanks, and he says if he's not going to win, he's going to take a lot of Americans out with him, which he did. And then right after that, in Hitler's mansion or castle, you might call it, him and his newfound bride, his longtime girlfriend, both committed suicide, and he also killed his 2 dogs. And he ordered to take them out in the backyard and pour tons of gasoline on them and burn them, and they did. And that was the end of Adolf Hitler. He was a very cruel and horrible person. I'm going to start reading some of the background on World War II. Do you want to read it, or you want me to?
No, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to read a little background right now. As the Germans attacked at the Ardennes on the morning of the 16th, Dwight Eisenhower, newly promoted to the rank of 5-star general. There's not too many 5-star generals.
Penn.
No, Eisenhower was a 5-star.
Eisenhower, all right.
Newly promoted to the rank of 5-star general, was attending his valet's wedding at Versailles headquarters. Generals Bradley and Hodges were visiting a Belgian gunmaker in order to custom-made shotguns. So these guys are all generals, but they're attending a wedding for one of his friends in Versailles, and then they also attended a custom-made gun shop to get fancy pistols made for them. Order a custom-made pair of pistols and custom-made shotguns. General Montgomery, have you heard of Montgomery when you're in Belgium?
Yeah.
Was playing golf at Eindhoven in Holland, convinced that the Germans could no longer stage major offensive operations. He planned to go home for Christmas until the war becomes more exciting. So all these top brass, one's playing golf in outside of Germany, the other one's attending a wedding, and a couple other generals are having custom-made shotguns and pearl-handled pistols made for themselves.
Yeah.
They thought Hitler was done. They were wrong. The German artillery had cut out telephone communications, and headquarters were far from the front, so it was not until late afternoon that the Allied commanders began to get fragment reports suggesting how exciting the war had suddenly become. In other words, it would only hit us now. Bradley said a few days earlier, we will kill more Germans with a good deal less effort if they'd only climb out of their holes and come up after us for a change. He got his wish, but both he and Hodges initially dismissed the offensive as a localized spoiling attack meant merely to lure Americans away for the assault on the Roe River dams. Eisenhower, who was at a wedding, ordered the 7th Armored Division from the 9th Army and the 10th Armored Division from Patton's 3rd Army to move to protect the northern and southern flanks of the Ardennes line, just in case. But it would be another 24 hours before he understood the enormity of what was happening. How do you exactly pronounce that name? Ardennes?
Ardennes?
Mr. Jeckovich, it's spelled A-R-D-E-N-N-E-S. How do you pronounce that?
What's that?
A-R-D-E-N-N-E-S. Ardennes?
Armies.
Ardennes.
Ardennes.
Okay, so here's what's going on. The generals, top brass, thinking it's over with. Hitler ran out of energy and gas, and so a couple of them are attending a wedding in Versailles, and another one's thinking he's going to go home for Christmas, and another one is getting custom-made shotguns and cut pearl-handled pistols made for themselves, because they thought Hitler ran out of steam. Little do they know. The only one that was suspicious of the whole thing was General Patton. Patton didn't believe that Hitler ran out of steam. In fact, it was so close to Christmas, in Patton's diary, he says, Christmas Day will be a perfect day to kill Germans. So Patton knew something was up. Patton knew, but all the rest of the generals thought it was, there was no more fight. And like I said, in Patton's diary, he said, on that Christmas coming up in '44, this will be a perfect Christmas day to kill Germans. Because that was Patton's birthday, by the way, it was on Christmas.
Yeah.
So, if the other fellow would hit us now, Bradley had said a few days earlier we'd kill more Germans. The Third Army to move to protect the northern southern flanks. The column of German army that began breaking through the Americans all along the line the next morning began to clarify. The Battle of the Bulge, named for the 40 miles the enemy had begun to carve into the American lines, be the biggest battle of the war on the Western Front. So the Battle of the Bulge was the granddaddy of all battles.
Oh, well.
Yeah. And you were in it, and you got Purple Heart, and what else? What else did Mr. Jeckovich get from the Battle of the Bulge?
Oh, Bronze Star.
Bronze Star, Purple Heart, you're damn straight.
Say what?
You got the Purple Heart and Bronze Star from the Battle of the Bulge. A great honor, and you survived after being shot up. And so, on paper, things seem to be going according to the German plan. In north, Diedrich's 6th Panther Army was hitting Americans below Monschau, hoping to make a quick work of the Green 99th Division, then hurry west to the Moos near Leek and race on across the flat Belgian plain to Antwerp. Hitler expected the 6th advance elements to reach there no later than Wednesday. Meanwhile, the 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General Haushoff von Montefiore, was intent on breaking through and enter the line held by the 106th and the 28th Infantry Divisions, where Ray Leopold and Tom Gallery were already under fire. And so it would come on more quickly and take on 2 rail and road hubs of the St. Vith at Bastogne, which controlled movement in the Ardennes, and then sweep to establish its own beachheads across the Moose and Neighbor and elsewhere. At the same time, the South, General Erich Brand-Herberger's misnamed 7th Panzer Army, it would be consisted of 4 infantry divisions without tanks and a few vehicles of any kind, was crossing to our own, set up a defense line to protect the German flanks against American counterattack. The Germans had achieved a surprise that was the first prerequisite for success. The first day since D-Day, stunned American soldiers would find themselves falling back, hunted by the enemy instead of hunting them. And the winter weather that Hitler had hoped for continued to hold. For 8 days, there would be no serious air support for the GIs on the ground. So because the weather conditions were so bad, the American GIs could have no air attack, no air support whatsoever. But the speed Hitler insisted upon would prove harder to achieve. German engineers, take care. German engineers would slowly getting bridges across. The German tankers sat for hours in traffic jams, breathing blue gasoline fumes, burning precious fuel. Snow and mud, narrow roads, and difficult terrain would make life hard for the retreating Americans. But they also slowed the advancing Germans, so eventually did the extraordinary tenacity of otherwise ordinary GIs. Maps of the Battle of Bulge seem straightforward enough, unambiguous across denote the movement of the Army's meticulously dotted lines, trace positions, and shift neatly from one point to another, and tidy numbered symbols are meant to show just where each unit was at a given moment. But the military maps invariably misled. They would be nothing unambiguous or meticulous or tidy but the struggle for the Ardennes. After a while, the squeaking of the tape tracks really got to me. I was close to that, and I had one. I could have touched the armored giants with a fishing rod as they passed. Eventually, one of the riflemen took a shot at a Panzer, but the next tape in line fired a shell in our direction, as to say, "Get the hell out of here." Luckily, he could get his barrel down low enough to do more than frighten us. All this time, he stayed hidden in the trees, and the brushes burrowed down in the snow. Somehow we convinced ourselves that if we couldn't see him, they couldn't see us. I'm sure they knew where we were, but they were more interested in keeping their schedule. They're more interested in keeping their schedule.
17 minutes.
No one was interested in keeping that schedule that the commander 6th Panzer Army's advance guard. Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Piper was an ardent young Nazi whose 1st SS Panzer Division had earned the nickname Blowtorch Battalion for the enthusiasm which it had burned villages and butchered civilians on the Eastern Front. Determined to lead their way to Antwerp, he so angered by the slow pace with the infantry was clearing a path for his 25-mile column in the morning of December 17th that he ordered the foot soldiers to chamber up on the vehicles and roared westward on the Lorschein Gap to blaze his own trail. Warning that the German mines lie ahead, he plowed right through them rather than wait to have them cleared. 5 tanks and 5 other vehicles were disabled, but he kept coming. But most of the Americans, it would have protracted the battle for Bastogne, some 30 miles south of St. Vith, that came to symbolize the Ardennes struggle. We all know they were holding out for their Catherine Phillips remembered, and we were all cheering them on. 7 roads spread out to re-enter this little market town, including the east and western highway supplying the German drive to Moose. Hitler was determined that Manifold's 5th Panzer Army take it right away, and by midday of the 7th, 3 armored divisions were fighting their way towards it. Eisenhower was no less determined to deny them the town and call in his 101st Airborne to help hold it. How the Sherman tanks compared to the Panzers tanks?
How were the German tanks
How the
compared to
Sherman tanks compared to the Panzer tanks?
a Panzer tank?
Yeah. How was the Panzer tanks?
They were both heavy armored. Both heavy armored. They had enough effect on their guns and that.
Here we go. It was then we learned that we were attacked through the very afternoon. Again, I got the sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. I was a dreaded sensation of not knowing what was going on. Would we live to see another daylight?
Man?
Would we live to see another daylight? Or would this turn out to be another dry run? There was always the unknown and the build-up for the worst, expecting and hoping for the best. As we moved through the snow-covered forest, it was already late that afternoon, and the woods took on an eerie, ghost-like appearance. I thought of Fink, probably still lying where he had fallen and was shot. I did not want to suffer the same fate, but how could I prevent it? I told everyone to keep his eyes open for the snipers in the trees and stay spread out. As we filled the woods, we made frequent stops as the rifle company scouted the area looking for Germans. It was turning colder again, and I started to shiver as we lay on the ground, waiting for the okay to move up. I found out that we were to attack the village of Maya Road, nestled among the rolling hills about 4 miles northeast of St. Vith. St. Vith was really a battleground, wasn't it?
Yeah.
St. Vith was a battleground. We were attached to the E Company and were told to seek out a position to afford covering fire for riflemen of the 2nd Platoon. I secured a defiled spot and set up the gun with Lape as a gunner and one of the ammo barrels I had selected for an assistant gunner. Here again was one of the hodgepodge arrangements in the company. There was no semblance of order of any kind for the lonely GI. Invariably, he was left to for his own makings. Fink's demise was a glaring example. A squad leader, I performed on my duties, checking the direction and effectiveness of fire of the machine gun, giving the appropriate adjustments to the gunner, all the while just being thrust into position with no training whatsoever. Just then, E Company started to move out, and the 105s and 155s opened up to our rear. I signaled to Lape, commence firing and begin to watch for our telltale tracers as they were spitting forward to disrupt the German lines. I motioned Lape to raise the level of the fire as he was firing too low, and I was afraid he was hitting our own troops. We were getting some mortar fire as the Germans had already spotted our gun position. From the white puff of smoke, our gun belched as it fired. I had picked out an alternate position, and we moved the gun to it. In between receiving mortar rounds, one of the ammo barrels got nicked with a piece of shrapnel. Luckily, there was always a medic close by. He gave him a shot and dressed the wound in back, and then told him to try to make it back to the aid station several miles to the rear. They left us 4 men short in the squad. E Company got pinned down in the open field before the village, and they called the tanks. They called for the tanks. We continued firing to take some of the firing off the pinned down GIs. The tanks and a platoon of Shermans passed our position and overtook the pinned down riflemen. As the tanks passed them, they got up and followed behind. When the tanks reached the village, they opened up abreast and followed by the artillery and our own mortars. We moved to cover the riflemen as they went through the village. The Germans had fled the village, leaving behind much equipment and some wounded. We set up the outskirts of the village in preparation for the counterattack, which never materialized. While regrouping in the village, we learned that Captain Druid had stepped on a mine, severing both of his legs at the knee. He would be evacuated to a hospital in France, then England, and finally U.S. He was out of the war for good, but he had to pay for that privilege, exiting the war. I had no strong feeling about hearing about Captain Druid. His attitude hearing about Fink was still vivid in my mind. My only thought was I envy him in returning to stateside, and he was out of the war. By daylight, 18 December, German tank columns were driving deep into all sectors of American defenses, all aimed at Belgian town called Bastogne, the most important rail and road city in the Ardennes. There were mass confusions all along the sector. No one knew the real situation except our division, and it trickled down to an individual unit level. Germany infantry were racing by Fort Wiltz, a southern route to Bastogne. Two American airborne divisions, the 82nd and the 101st, were moving to the Ardennes and from France to help stem the tide of the on-Russian German infantry and tanks. We were attached to Combat Command B of the 10th Division and told to form a perimeter of defense section front of Bastogne. The three main points would be a village 5 miles to the north, the same distance due east of St. Vith, and one on the road to Wiltz Road. We set up a roadblock and were tensely awaiting the first attack. Infantry stragglers would run into our lines, telling wild stories of the overwhelming number of tanks and infantry overcoming their positions. They had discarded all their fighting equipment, none had maps, and their action started as they took to the cellars. There was no attempt to hold these stragglers. Most of the time they would just continue to roam aimlessly and would soon wander off to be captured by the Germans or at times freeze to death in the woods. At 5:30 hours, a group of half-tracks could be heard and seen approaching the roadblocks. In the darkness, the outposts could not tell whether they were friendly or enemy. The sentry to the front yelled, "Halt!" 4 times. The first vehicle pulled to a grinding halt within yards of the roadblock. Someone in the half-track yelled at something in German, and we opened up on our machine gun, and then from the bank on the roadside, on the road, GI showered the half-track with hand grenades and bazooka fire. There was a large screaming as some of the Germans jumped out and fell onto the half-tracks as they lay in the ditches. The rest of the enemy column quickly unloaded and deployed into ditches along the road. At 8:30 hours, 2 Tiger tanks nosed out of the fog and stopped within 20 yards of our position. A 57mm anti-tank gun to the right of the road and more than 30 yards from the tanks. A medium tank with a 75mm gun was looking straight at them. We opened up on the 2 tanks and the riflemen picked up the bazookas along with their anti-tank gun and medium tank. Can I get the mail?
5 minutes.
All fired at the same time in the 2 Tiger tanks. In a matter of minutes, both tanks were reduced to much tangled metal. By mid-morning, an entire Panzer division of more than 30 tanks, different vantage points, were coming down the road, straight at us, leading enemy formations with 1,000 yards away. Everyone fired with what he had. When they closed at 800 yards, the tanks off the ridge halted and shelled the town. Other tanks were swinging around the right flank, but on the left, enemy armor was already within 200 yards of our position. Little knots of men on foot were coming up behind the enemy German tanks. The platoon of tank destroyers added firepower with its gun, but they were no match for the superior Tigers. 9 Mark IVs and Mark Vs were hit straight away. They ended in flames, but there were too many of them and too few of us. 3 Shermans were getting into firing position, and the Tigers and Panzers would pick them off with their superior firepower. The major came running out shouting, "Pull back, pull back." We hastily pulled a gun and hightailed it into the 2 remaining vehicles left in the area. The rest had scrambled with great urgency to the next village, hoping to escape the onslaught of the Tigers. As we reached the village, we could form a skirmish line in front of the remaining artillery battalions. All types of personnel were used: headquarters people, stragglers, survivors, walking wounded. Anything that moved was thrown into the line. We waited for the Germans to attack from the east, but the 2nd Panzer Division, which had crushed both roadblocks, had no intentions of coming through the small village. About a mile short of the village, they swung north onto the road leaving Noville, a village of 5 miles from Bastogne. Minutes? In the confusion, I had lost track of several ammo.
3.
In confusion, I lost track of several ammo barrels from the squad. I did not know what happened to them, nor did I see any of them take a direct hit or go down. I was concerned about the gun crew and keep it intact, ready to fire as we moved from one position to another. Lape was more of a concern than the rest of the squad. At one moment, I almost reversed roles and made the ammo bearer, whom I had designated assistant gunner, the gunner, and dropped Lape back to second gunner. I did not do anything about my concern. Instead, I focused all my efforts on making the gun available and looking after the safety of the squad. The tension increased as we saw the steady line of trucks, guns, and men retreating from the surrounding villages. The stragglers were faces black with powder burns and eyes red from lack of sleep, were dazed and terrific, all uttering the disaster and onslaught of the tanks and more tanks. The Ardennes battlefield was a mess, a scene indescribable and utter chaos. No one, German or American, private or general, knew what was actually happening. I thought, or I knew, that we were fortunate in a sense to be attacked to an experienced unit rather than face the utter deadly confusion with segments of our division. I would rather face the enemy aided by the 2nd or 3rd Armor or the 101st or the 2nd Armored Division, Airborne Division.
1 minute 53.
It was 2,400 hours in Germany, and excited citizens were reading and listening to the thrilling news of the great offensive. Their radios were spewing out the triumphant news of the German tanks and infantry forcing out the enemy to surrender in droves, also saying that the Americans realized that the battle was over for them. There was also much panic in and behind the Allied lines in all the towns and cities, not only in Luxembourg and Belgium, but in France and Holland. They all remember the Blitzkrieg in 1940. Our ammunition was getting low, and I scrounged around town to try to locate an ordnance depot. Somehow they were distributing ammo of all kinds, providing they had any on hand. Minutes?
50 seconds.
There was no such confusion. There was so much confusion and constant hurrying about it, I did not have much luck in finding anything resembling an ordnance depot. What was usually the case in the past weeks was that the ammo and weapons were passed out to the troops as they went by. Also, in some instances, case of hand grenades and M1 ammunition were put alongside the road in separate piles so that the men could put up the things they needed as they went by. Time?
15 seconds.
At this point, events were so hectic and out of control for any semblance or orderliness, it was just a matter of luck in finding my way.
All right,
take a break,
we'll take a break.
go get